Thank you so much for having me. Carol back there, Carol Monet, actually reached out to the library just to, basically rent a room and speak. And then the library Carol decided to bring it on under her wing, and this way they could promote it. And I really thank you for that, because the paddle adventure is only the first part of the adventure. The rest of it is talking to people about why I do the crazy stuff that I do. Because, even though I don't really think it's crazy, it's my passion, I do have to fess up that a lot of people do say it is crazy. And my husband just lives with it and deals with it. So, he actually is the saint behind, he's the caretaker. He juggles the job. He's basically the single husband. When I ditch the kids and the family, and now the 4 birds and the dog and the guinea pig and the fish, right, for upcoming journeys. So he's the guy who keeps it all together while I'm on these. I don't know what I did. Okay. I don't know what I did. I'm so sorry. I have no. If I were, and unfortunately, I'm sorry. I'm an Apple person, so I don't know anything about PCs, and I don't know what I did.
Get the arrow to go on the orange block.
Yeah, that's the really hard part. It's almost yeah. Okay, that's all you do? Look, I totally messed it up in the first.
I'll get Techno Woman back.
It's easier to paddle.
Your t-shirt.
Oh, my t-shirt. Actually, this is a local organization by me. This is the Marine Mammal Stranding Center in Brigantine. I don't know if you ever get down to New Jersey. I'm actually in South Jersey, and believe it or not, there's a big difference between North Jersey and South Jersey. They're more hilly and rocky. We are sandy, flat, and more piney in all manner of the word. That's what we call our locals that have been there for generations. They're the Pineys. The Pinelands actually, just a little aside from where I'm from, is the largest tract of undeveloped land between Boston and Washington, D.C. on the seaboard. In fact, if you can Google, I think, the satellite pictures at night that they take, and all of South Jersey looks like a big black spot in the Pinelands, because there's so little development there. You'll see the Philly region and the New York region just lit up. And then, yay, thank you so much. And I'm sorry I haven't done the video yet, but this is basically, this is a short little trip I did around New Jersey this year. But this is kind of what it's all about. This is a small little version of the whole Bigger Paddles. And it's just 2 minutes long.
Shall we put the lights down?
Oh, yeah.
What is it with the lights? I'm too sorry. Oh, much better.
Finishing her 9-day, 350-mile journey, Margo Pellegrino tied up her canoe on the Passaic River in Newark.
It was good. I got a little sunburned. I wasn't as religious with the sunblock as I should have been.
Margo Pellegrino doesn't have a fancy science degree. Her athletic achievements are not necessarily anything to brag about, but she's tough, determined, and, as her husband says, not the kind to sit back and do nothing. After paddling around the state for 9 straight days, most of us would be pretty wiped out. Not Margo Pellegrino. Yeah, she's tired, but the rush is taking over.
I do like to be outside. I do get an adrenaline rush from, riding a good swell.
The welcoming committee is modest, but a hug from her daughter will do the trick. You see, Margo is undeterred, stopping at nothing when it comes to the environment.
When you start seeing signs within your ecosystem, that things are dying off and changing, it's really time to pay attention.
Maybe this will do it. She starts in Trenton and goes down the Delaware River, curving around the state's southern tip, all the way up the coast and reaching Newark 9 days later. There was a safety boat nearby and resting along the way. She's collecting samples for testing. Margo wants to know what lies beneath. Her instincts say the worst of it is right here in the Passaic River. Her growing fears are only slightly dulled by her optimism. She's doing this for a reason, raising awareness, because, as she says, there's
when you stop hurting something, it does get better. You just have to stop hurting it.
She's calling on lawmakers to act. At 47, she's not even close to done. Eyeing a journey from Newark to Chicago. Brian, I'm not sure exactly the route she would take, but if anybody would know,
She would
it
know.
would be her.
Hey, hats off to her. Proud of her. Thanks, Nick.
Okay, now how do we, I'm so sorry. Thank you so much. So-
Past August?
That was this past August. I am still waiting. It's a new company that is going to be doing the tests, and that's actually something that they donated. This is part of their, I've known Andrea Neal, Dr. Neal, for, I guess, 7 years now, and she is starting a new company, and these water tests will look at 1,100 different organics and heavy metals. Just that they're having a few hiccups with getting everything together so that they can actually run them. Once they get it going, they can run 100 tests at a time, and I took, I guess, about 70 some odd tests with this trip. So as soon as we have results, we're going to be putting them on a map. So that you can click on where I pulled the samples, and then you can see what the water, all the different things that's in the water. And that is something we're hoping to mirror for an upcoming trip this summer to Chicago, which actually the route's really pretty simple. It's out from Newark out to New York City, and then up the Hudson and into the Erie Canal. And actually I can duck off and come into like the Syracuse Rowing Club, because that's like a mile off of the Erie Canal. So hopefully I can, paddle into there and keep the boat overnight, because it is something to orchestrate. It's a 20-foot long, very lightweight, rather fragile, even though it's very strong. I know it's kind of an oxymoron. It doesn't crunch well against like hard surfaces, but it's a very tough boat, very seaworthy. But it's a trick to store overnight and keep going. But anyway, so that's basically that little trip in a nutshell is the kind of stuff that I try to do, which is get as much press together and local groups, because it's really the local groups that know their local issues, that can speak the best about what they are fighting in their own area. And of course, it all, this is the upstream paddle, because it all trickles down out to the ocean. Believe it or not, the problems in your backyard with Onondaga Lake are mirrored in the ocean, especially our nearshore and bay areas. And so basically, those are the two reasons that I do what I do. My daughter, and this is my ever-patient husband, so I have to put him in there because we are a team. We are a team. It's a lot of sacrifice, and hence there's a little bit of fundraising involved just to offset costs, because after doing the West Coast and the East Coast on the family budget, it really does crunch things just a bit. So I am a project of the Blue Frontier campaign. And they're kind of a very small organization, actually, but they really try to provide the tools for different grassroots groups to come together and use their voices to help fight their battles and to pull together. Because it's usually, it's not going to be one or two people that does it. It's going to take all of us. It's a big problem. What we're seeing now with the ocean and our rivers and lakes is a problem that didn't happen overnight, and we are all, it's almost we need to be a little introspective about it, but we can fix things. I am convinced. This is the local Surfrider chapter, and of course, the East Coast Paddle was a partnership with and actually there's been a lot of paddles, and I'll kind of back up. There was the Miami to Maine in 2007, and that was a partnership with the East Coast chapters of Surfrider Foundation and National Environmental Trust, which is now part of Pew. And the mission was basically to paddle and hook up with different groups and to talk about things that were impacting their ocean areas. And of course, a lot of it, you see with overdevelopment, and you have issues of runoff, lawns, golf courses, big ag. I mean, it's a problem. I mean, it's definitely something we can address and fix. We just have to have the will to do it. And then this is the Gulf Paddle with NRDC and the Gulf Restoration Network. And actually there was a little tiny paddle in before that. But so I've done about roughly 5,000 miles of paddling for the ocean. And this I figured, I kind of do things different. I don't want to hammer people with the environmental message, except that is the reason why I am doing these paddles, is because of the environmental issues. with our ocean, particularly. But I also like to highlight the silly things that happen, because it's not really it's not your standard adventure where you can lollygag and do things on your own time. You do have to be very conscious of your schedule. So sometimes you're paddling when you don't necessarily want to, because you've got to meet with folks and meet with the press, and the press likes the schedule. So you're doing something that's kind of it's not always it's not always the easiest thing. You do find yourself in funny situations, and this is a local old salt. This guy, Captain Fogel, lived actually next door to my grandparents in Summers Point, which is by Ocean City. And he actually paddled the East Coast and the West Coast before me. And he paddled from New York City to Miami in 1970. And then he testified before Congress on behalf of the Clean Water Act. So, and he also did water tests along the way. And then he repeated it in 1990, which he did it with a group of people, and that didn't work out so well, I don't think, because it's easier to do these adventures sometimes solo, just because you only have yourself to organize. And the name of the game is, of course, trying to get as much attention, no matter if the press wants you to do silly things like bring a 21-foot long boat into a TV studio. That was interesting. And basically they're kind of, it is actually, it was a funny little clip. They're basically bringing it in there to laugh at me. You're out on the ocean in this, and my mom calls it the splinter, because it is like 14 inches at the beam, but it's such a seaworthy boat, you can't even believe it. If you saw some of this stuff, if I had a camera on my boat at the time on the West Coast, you would never want to be in a kayak on the West Coast. You'd want one of these. You'd want an OC1, an outrigger, a one-person outrigger canoe. And I have to plug our Raritan Riverkeeper, who also volunteers here, and he is this guy is a saint. And the adventure isn't just, dealing with the day and getting from A to B. It's also the people that you meet and the characters that you meet. And if you ever feel down on humanity, just go on an adventure, because it really does bring out the best in people. People want to help you and see you through, and they become involved, and they're part of it. And in fact, the adventure really wouldn't happen if it weren't for the people. So it really is a good way to, I think, get excited about the human race again. And even though we have lots of challenges before us, it also does make you feel hopeful that we can, no matter our, political quarreling, we can get on the same page and work together for the greater good. And of course, I have to thank Ford, because they provided the vehicle for the West Coast. Although since, and this is it relatively clean, we smacked it full of stickers, so now they have a policy. No stickers, all right, so if I get another Ford for this trip, I can't put stickers. But yes, you definitely have to have, and a good paddle. Kealoha is my paddle sponsor. So gear is definitely important, and yes, I'm wearing a helmet, and it's not what you would normally wear with an outrigger canoe, which is fiberglass, because you really don't want to be it's not fiberglass, it's carbon. You really don't want to be crashing a 21-foot boat that weighs 19 pounds through the surf. But you know what? There is that surf out there, and sometimes stuff happens. And after cracking the ama, that's the side part of my canoe, on my head, I figured, Christoph, who actually, he wrote on Celtic tides. He kayaks in cold water areas, and he's written a bunch of books. Christoph, really good read too, really, really interesting. And he said, you might want to get a helmet. Nah, that's overkill. And after I broke the ama on my head coming in Washington on heavy surf, I thought, well, maybe that's not such a bad idea after all. So I got that. And it's, of course, you cannot have, there's lots of people who do solo adventures, but if you're doing it through a schedule and you have to communicate with press and the groups and the people that are hosting you and the people, who want to be involved, who want to meet you on the water and paddle, then you have to have someone alongside on the road to be your land crew manager, even if it's a land crew of one. And that was June. And really, that's an adventure all in itself. And I'm hiring, by the way, for the Chicago trip. So if you know anyone who can fly by the seat of their pants, doesn't mind getting wet, doesn't mind, any kind of haphazard sleeping condition, then this is I need that kind of person. And she was a really it couldn't have been done without June. And it's funny, I have to take a little break here because these are 2 paddles that are going right now, 2 adventures, and they're learning. Both of these guys are Amy and Dave down here. They are up, they're from the Boundary Waters. And they're paddling from the Boundary Waters in Minnesota down to Washington, D.C. to try to gather petitions or gather signatures because they want to stop a mine that's going to be put in the pristine watershed of the Boundary Waters. So they were getting their first taste. Usually they're used to doing expeditions. They're getting their first taste of paddling to a schedule, as well as Dr. Deb Walters, who's paddling from Maine to Guatemala. So I figured in case you want to, if you get hooked on the adventures, here's 2 more for you. So, and actually these guys are done and they're going to be making their way up the coast doing speaking gigs. But see, this is one of the things that your logistics manager might find herself doing. This was, yes, and the reason she's on her surfboard and holding onto the canoe is because, and that's the ama, is because I was being spit out of this little creek called the Queets River, which was really not a river at all. I call it a creek, little, but to be, spit out into the ocean. And we figured, the idea was she was going to be on her surfboard and then we would get to the beach area and kind of pull off and check the surf. Because sometimes with a loaded canoe, it's really hard to get it in the water with just one person. So she helps get me out there. And so we figured, well, we'll just, since we were camping further upstream, we'll just float down. But I had to have her bail out very close because I was going 6 miles an hour and I wasn't even paddling and I was just worried what was going to happen when we got to the very end. And kid you not, when I looked at my GPS, I was going 10 miles an hour and I wasn't even paddling. There was no choice. I was just going to go out in the surf and thank goodness there wasn't anything bad happening in the surf because I would just spit right out. But you never know. And you do things like your bit of luck. So someone had given, those are tea leaves from Hawaii. And then of course, like I said, the people are just indispensable. That's Ray Fusco. I don't know if any of you are competitive paddlers. He used to organize the Mayor's Cup, which was a race around New York City. So he knows the waters like the back of his hand. So when he heard I was doing the Miami and Maine trip, he's like, well, let me escort you. So he did, which was awesome because it was crazy. The tide rushing in was rushing in right around rush hour traffic. So we had all the ferries and the high-speed ferries going every which way, and he is really good with knowing the routes, which was awesome because it's harrowing to be on the water with ferries going. It's nuts. So. But if you're doing these long journeys, you can't help, even if you're not an environmental activist, you can't help but see things around you that are not good. This is a turtle. Obviously, I'm not sure if it's a loggerhead. I think it was a loggerhead. It was dead for a while, and that was in the coarse sound behind Ocracoke in the Outer Banks. And when I told one fisherman who I helped cut little green turtles out of his net, and I told him about this, he said, ooh, that could shut somebody down. There's only 2 fishermen in Ocracoke, and they're both really old. So I figured, you know what, let them retire. Because there's only 2 left. And the fisherman that is cutting out the little green turtles out of his net is, he was really depressed that day because he caught, he was hoping to catch more flounder or whatever it was he was catching with the nets than what he caught, and the one, and he was obviously upset with the lack of fish he was catching. And, and then at the same time complaining about the regulations. And I'm thinking, well, maybe if we have the regulations, the fish will come back. And he went on to tell me how they call the cormorants in Canada. But you really do collect the stories as you go along. And, here's, another example, I think, of really good luck. Because I took a different route going from Miami to Maine. I went along the Delmarva Peninsula on the outside, rather than going on the inside and having to go up the C&D Canal, because you can't really go in the ocean in that area because the military does a lot of training out there, and so they're always dropping things out there, and you just don't want to, and shooting things, so you don't want to be out on the ocean. You really do want to be on the inside. But this was supposed to be, this is the Assawoman Canal, it was supposed to be dredged. I had no idea about this when I was planning the trip. And then I found out that the people that live in that area fought the dredging because it would mean more boat traffic, big boats. It was going to ruin their banks. It would cause more erosion along the sides. And it just would be a disaster. And so they fought it, which was really good for me because it would have been miserable if they were dredging. I wouldn't have been able to get through. Back to the West Coast, the plastic ocean. I'm sure like you've heard all the stories about, how many of you have heard about the plastic gyre, the garbage patch? Yes. I mean, it really, and it's not just one, and it's not just a patch. They're finding styrenes and estuarines along our shores. In fact, more of the contaminants from the plastics as they break down that they give off are actually found along our shores. So like little kids that are out there playing, in the water, it's got these contaminants in. And it is a problem. I mean, unfortunately, I don't think you can see from where you're sitting. And this was out in Oregon by Cape Blanco. But all of those bottle caps, they're from Asia. And it's just how the currents, yeah. And this park ranger, he just made this mosaic. So, and it's really, it is sobering. It is a huge problem. And, this is our local organization, but Clean Ocean Action actually is also very visible in New York, like along Long Island and where is it, the Rockaways. Cindy Zipf she's the woman who heads up that organization and founded it. It's been around for 25 to 30 years now. I'm losing track of time. She basically got a bunch of groups together and they stopped ocean dumping. So we don't have medical waste washing up on our shore, and we don't have half the stuff that we used to have. I mean, and it's amazing when you think of what she accomplished, because it really boggles my mind, because it's like, clearly we can do anything if we put our minds to it. Because it wasn't just working with the government and fighting government entities to get this legislation, it was fighting the mafia. Because the mob runs a lot of the garbage trucks out of New York City. So she was battling not just the government, but some people say, well, it's the same thing. But seriously, she really pulled it together. She is one gutsy woman, Cindy Zipf. Because this is, what we're battling. This is Trenton. This is the DNR canal that goes from the Delaware to the Raritan, except not quite anymore because some genius paved over and made it go, the Raritan Canal go underground. So now it doesn't even connect. You have to portage. But they have a boom. This little line thing here is part of a boom that holds, and of course you can see it blows over. But they come along periodically and clean it out, because it goes downstream. And this is Cape Blanco. East Coast, West Coast, inside Potomac River, Chesapeake, this is a huge issue, and it's just becoming, more and more apparent. Those are plastics, and there's little tiny things called nurdles, like that little round piece right there. That's actually what the plastic things start out as. And from what I heard, and I don't know if this is any longer true, but in China, they just ship them by the train load, and they're not covered, so they blow off too, and litter the environment. And there's Dr. Andrea Neal actually was working with Jean-Michel Cousteau's Ocean Futures group, and they have some pretty interesting. If you go to Project Carsci and Google it, they have some video footage of some of the little microorganisms eating teensy-beensy bits of plastic, and you can actually see these little organisms because they're clear and see-through, you can see the plastic in them. And of course, this is working its way up to through the food chain. So we don't know yet what the consequences are, but it doesn't sound too good. And not just, the plastic issue is bad enough, but we also, of course, have the runoff issue of, an oil and blah, blah, blah. Who knows? But that is probably from someone's bilge more than anything, because it wasn't raining too much. But runoff is a huge issue. I did this presentation a couple years ago in Hackensack to this kayak group up there in New Jersey. And this one guy comes up to me after the presentation, after he saw this, and he goes, "Is that really the Crystal River?" He said, "Yeah, that's the Crystal River." He was blown away by that picture, which I put in my presentations because I promised the guy who runs the dive shop and also the marina there that I would tell everyone that, you know, when he was a kid, and the guy was, I'm guessing he's around my age, in the 40s, 47. So when he was a kid, he could grow up and dive and see, you could see on one side of the river to the other side underwater. And you could swim and it was crystal clear. And now because of the development and because the runoff is not being controlled and everyone wants the golf course lawns and puts tons of fertilizer on them, on those lawns, and it runs off, and this is what you have now. You're fertilizing the, rivers like the Crystal River, which the Gulf Coast of Florida is amazing. I don't know if you ever got a chance to go there, but it's really kind of wild. I mean, I love the East Coast for the ocean and that aspect, but there's something still wild and natural about the Gulf Coast of Florida. And it's a slower pace, kind of like the difference between North Jersey and South Jersey, So people are up in arms. I mean, this was in May, and the dive shop operator said in the heat of the summer, you can't even get boats in there. You can't even, because it just gets so full. But yeah, the guy that I spoke to in the Hackensack group just couldn't believe it, because he said, I was there 20 years ago and it didn't look like that at all. And this is what it should, as clear as it should be. This is a place that actually is 7 sisters, and it's, or 3 sisters, I always forget the name. There was going to be a big condo complex built around it, and a bunch of the local groups, just citizens and businesses and environmental groups got together to protect it, and they were able to win, which is amazing. I mean, I just stuck my camera in and just snapped it. People go down with bottles, empty bottles, and they go down to the springs because you can see them 30 feet down. When you're sitting in your boat, you can see the holes where the springs. And they go down and they scoop up the water, and it's perfectly drinkable. It's perfectly, amazingly drinkable. And there was one spot, Wakulla County has Wakulla Springs. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. There was, I don't have it in this PowerPoint, but there's this like big mass of algae. It's not a huge, horrible mass, but they had a leak, a one-time leak in their sewer plant, and it created this algae, and it's going to take it 30 years before that water cycles through and cleans it out all over again. 30 years. But see, there is hope. I mean, just 30 years from now. So this is like some of the silly things we do that, that does impact our waterways, no matter whether you're on the bay, like this is the Chesapeake Bay, or a river or a lake. And this is a cornfield that is right up to the Chesapeake. And of course, corn is one of our more fertilizer-intensive crops, and of course, it also needs lots of water, so you're just, by that nature of that crop, you're just watering it constantly, fertilizing it constantly, and it goes into the Chesapeake, where I got yelled at by a crabber. I got yelled at a lot of times on these paddles. Not that they were mad at me, but frustration, just sheer frustration. Because this crabber was mad because he was pulling up dead crabs. They get asphyxiated. When it gets so warm, the water doesn't hold the oxygen. It also gets overburdened with the algae, which also, doesn't help matters. And it's a disaster. It's absolutely a disaster. And it's very hard. There's very few people anymore who can actually make a living harvesting crabs. Fish on the Potomac. You don't need it. And of course, the Potomac's from DC. I mean, the poor Chesapeake, when you really start thinking about, the Susquehanna goes into it, and the Potomac, and then all these other, rivers coming from very highly populated areas, it's really in a sad strait right now. When it's so hard to really think about the problem in terms of, well, what does it really mean? What happens if we lose the Chesapeake? What happens if we lose the ocean? And, we have a lot of big interests who are very interested in, developing certain industries. But once they cut and run, then all the other, you have a whole plethora of smaller businesses that depend on those healthy resources. Like these guys, the oystermen in the Apalachicola. That crop, those oysters, that industry can be maintained for years and years and years. It can go on indefinitely. as long as it's done sustainably, which they're doing, although incidentally, every oyster you eat was commercially raised. There's no more wild oysters. Not at the levels that we need them to feed people. So they're all, raised out on the West Coast, and then the babies are shipped here. And then I think they might have hatcheries on the East Coast too, I'm not sure. The day I paddled into Apalachicola on my way to New Orleans, we had a big shindig at the marina there, or it was the little maritime museum. And these guys, the Appalachia River Keeper, had to have an emergency meeting. They were pulling all the oystermen off the water that day and closing down the shellfish beds for the season because of all the rain that they were getting in Georgia, which was causing more runoff. And it was, you can't harvest the oysters when they're full of bacteria because you'll get people sick. So basically, these guys were out of work for a while. But then you go to Alabama and all is good. Hurricane Alley, it is so silly. And it's, the funny thing is, you go all over, East Coast, West Coast, in between, it's like you scratch your head and you start realizing we do some really silly things. Like put these big buildings right on the beach where they can get whacked by a hurricane. Because you further paddle down that way and you can see remnants of hotels, right? Remnants. I did get to stay in a fort in Fort Morgan, which is a Confederate fort, and that somehow lasted, but that was kind of a little more protected and more inland. But
Are those hotels?
those are hotels, and yeah. But if you have healthy resources and you take care of them, then you can make a living off of them. Like this woman makes a living taking pictures of people in their boats because they get all these vacationers, and this is what she does all day. She's got her cooler, she's set up, and she takes pictures of people in their boats, and that's her job. And that's actually a very interesting place to visit. That's another spring-fed river, and they actually have a place called Monkey Island that monkeys actually live on. And I forget how many monkeys they have. There's a little lighthouse there, and it's a local tourist attraction is Monkey Island, but you're not supposed to feed them. So don't. And Captain Wright of the Everglades tours, last time there was the government shutdown, he really lost because he depends on the parks. He has permits to take people into the Everglades, and his business was really hurt last time there was a government shutdown. But he set up camp for me. It was absolutely fantastic. The best shower I ever took was this little solar shower thing that it was perfect, and camping, and people the other people that you get to meet, local crabbers and shrimpers, and if you ever are in Codan, Alabama, these are the people to go to for shrimp if you still want to eat shrimp from the Gulf. And they were a real godsend. When I was paddling, I was doing a 54-mile paddle. In the wind, and all of a sudden my rudder cable snapped and I had no steering, and it's really hard to steer such a lightweight boat without your rudder. And they came up to me and said, you were going pretty good. What happened? You need any help? And I heard my late father's voice in my head saying, don't be an idiot, take the help. And so we got the boat we got the boat into his boat that he made, his cousin made, got it to his cousin, and they just dropped everything to get me back on the water, to jerry-rig the rudder cable so that I could once again be on my way. Didn't realize, though, I had crunched, actually I kind of did realize I crunched my boat on his boat, and it, punctured it a little bit, but I have this emergency tape. Unfortunately, though, I didn't really think about it. I had WD-40 on my hand, so it didn't really hold. So I finished my 50-mile paddle, wondering why it was why I was feeling so tired and why it was taking so long. And then the next day, and then that boat was docked. I still made it in time for the press, though. Still made it in time, just a little bit of late. But I was like, why am I going so slow? And boy, this is, I thought I was in better shape than this by now. And then the next day, never got the boat out of the water because it was at the dock. The next day is a 35-mile paddle to Bay St. Louis, and it took 5 people to get the boat out of the water because it was so full of water. And I was thinking, why is this not, why is this not riding the waves? Maybe it was because that guy kept buying me gin and tonics and I kept drinking them. Maybe that's what the problem is. But it was waterlogged. It was totally waterlogged. And so then we had another repair. It was just, it really is the people that just like keep you going. And and this is another example of local business, but really, and it is, another host too, and he hosted me as well. I mean, the kindness of strangers, really. And the Miami to Maine story, I think, has some of the funniest elements to it. Is when I left, 2 weeks before I left, this guy left Miami. He was going to New York City, and someone had just challenged him. He planned for like 2 or 3 years to do this trip on his sit on top pedal kayak, and I kept hearing about him as I'm paddling along, and then apparently in Norfolk, Virginia, we were staying at almost the same place overnight in the same area, and we crossed the Chesapeake Bay. I'd caught up to him by then, and we crossed the same day, except I happened to go 50 miles. He just crossed and like called it a day. And then I took off a week to go down to DC, and then came back, and I figured, I'll never catch Chris Simons. And then I'm paddling in the Barnegat Bay, which is one of our really big bays behind Long Beach Island. And I see this guy with all his bags. I'm like, are you Chris Simons? He says, are you Margo Pellegrino? So we paddled into New York City together. It was just a phenomenal, it was like cat and mouse all through the Carolinas and then into Virginia. And then I figured I lost him. And then what? And then we crashed a wedding party, which was funny because he lost his pedals in North Carolina. He got dumped and lost his pedals. So we went to this restaurant and we crashed this wedding. We didn't mean to, but the bride and the bride worked for Jersey Paddler, which is a big outfitter. And she immediately, imagine this, in her wedding, calls her boss and has him bring spare pedals down for Chris so that we could make it to the cut for the Point Pleasant Canal, because we were on a deadline. And he could go a lot faster with that. It was just absolutely insane and such a fluke. So we made it, and we made it into the city too. And as we're paddling up, I said, do you pay attention to the tides? He goes, well, no, not really. I said, well, we're going around Sandy Hook, and the buoy's going, I'm like, that's why you got to pay attention to the tides. You don't want to go against that. And, so it was just a lucky thing also for him, because then he stayed with me for my next, and I'm very fortunate that the people who have hosted me are so casual. They don't mind an extra person, so they got Chris too. But some of the harrowing things that happen, it's unbelievable. This is, I don't know if you can see it very well up at the top right there. That's the watermark. This was paddling into New Orleans. I was going into Lake Pontchartrain. The day before, I had some mild harassment issues by some angry locals who told me they like to burn dead dinosaurs. And, and even though that wasn't like really specifically what, the mission is when I'm paddling, I guess they didn't like the environmental aspect at all. So they were like letting their opinions be known. And so I decided the next day, since my whole route is very well publicized, to kind of hide between two bridges. And I thought, I was feeling all smug about it, like, haha, they can't come in here, it's too choppy. And then I realized, look how close that watermark is to the bottom of the bridge. And I'm thinking, this was really not a good idea, because I have to really time it, or maybe I should like flip the canoe over and swim under. And because really, if my boat is on something that high, I'm gonna go into the bridge when I'm going under if I don't time it. So, and there was a stiff wind coming out of the northeast, so I just timed it, and it was like, whoo, I did it. But yeah, it was one of those, like, if I had a little bubble over my head, it would have like those little asterisks and things. You know, when you can't help but see, as I keep saying, but you can't help but see, this is, you know, our vulnerable infrastructure, even back to the bridge, because that's a railroad bridge and that's a windy day. And it wasn't, I don't think there was any storm. It was just a windy day. And it makes you wonder, like in a hurricane, this is the railroad bridge that runs along Route 10. And you'd see this a lot in the New Orleans area. Like the trains are just like feet above the water. It's so vulnerable. And, you know, even in the Jersey Shore, like we don't have stuff this, actually we do. We do on the Gulf, I mean on the Delaware Bay Shore area of New Jersey. There is one town that really isn't there anymore. And we are seeing high tides, high moon, you know, the full moon tides. There's streets that are just covered with salt water. You know, we did a beach sweep for Clean Ocean Action. My husband's like yahooing it through the puddles with his little diesel. And I said, Carl, that's not rainwater. And sure enough, we're putt-putting home because the salt water clogs up the car, you know, at like 35 miles an hour the whole way home because he's going through the puddles that he's not even thinking. It's like, this is seawater. And this was our own Hurricane Sandy at Ortley Beach, which is still, we're still, you know, it's coming back. And I'm not saying that we have to go back to living in a tent, you know, even though that's a great way to live if you're in somewhere warm. But, you know, there are things that we can do. And I think, you know, we can develop in I think a more logical manner. I mean, this is Steinhatchee, Florida. If you want to look at a place that's really doing it right, this is a neat little town. Gravel roads and lots of, and some pavement too, but they really try to keep it to a minimum. There's parts of Georgia also that they try to keep, like the barrier islands, they don't want to put paved roads on just because it helps with the water and you know, decreases runoff. And it's very well planted. And that's Joy Azel, and she's a 5th or 6th generation Floridian. And she was one of the original, she's from an original cracker family. And I'm like, how did you, and she goes, you ever knew how we get that cracker name? It's from the whips cracking, you know, for the cattle. And she kind of was, she's constantly battling the Buckeye pulp mill, which is on the Fenn Holloway River, which actually I think that's another thing that's Googleable, is the Fenn Holloway River. That was on 60 Minutes. It's probably one of the most polluted rivers in the country. It was a spring-fed river. It used to be as crystal clear as the Crystal River before that got choked up with algae. And in times of drought, the only thing that comes down that river is the effluent from the pulp mill. It actually is something you can smell. A friend, I met up with this one kayaker and I said, you know, I could smell it. He goes, well, you know, you can smell the pulp mill. I said, no, Doug, the wind was blowing out of the west. There's no way that was the pulp mill on the east. It was a west wind. And the water literally, I remember paddling that stretch and being so furious because the water actually burned your fingers. And, you know, I always get my fingers wet when I'm paddling, and my feet in my canoe are always in little puddles of water. And it was burny and smelly, and I couldn't believe it was even allowed. And it gets waiver after waiver to pollute. And, you know, it's just a bad thing. But, you know, there's people like these people who, this is Seattle, which, believe it or not, has a big Hawaiian population. There's a lot of outrigger canoe clubs and dragon boat clubs up there. And especially like the Hawaiian clubs really seem to get the nature, you know, get the taking care of the land and taking care of the ocean. So, which is kind of also, you know, it kind of goes along with the whole outrigger canoe thing, which is really a scaled down version of the 6-man teams, the 6-man boats that they have in Hawaii and other Polynesian areas, islands. Because that's what they populated all those Pacific islands with. That's how they did it. They had the sailing canoes, and they had the traditional 6-person canoes. And that was probably a record right there of outrigger canoes in the lock going out of Washington or Lake Washington in Seattle and going out into the Straits. And of course, your friendly Coast Guard, which I love to plug them because they did save me once off of Atlantic City, which was another story, and I probably am running out of time. But they also actually do have an interesting story. These guys, because, the waters on the West Coast are so much rougher than the East Coast. I mean, it's night and day. I mean, we can have ugly seas off the East Coast, but it's just not the same thing. Our harbors are a lot easier usually to get into. They're especially up in Oregon and Washington, the Coast Guard has authority to shut down those harbor entrances, which they call bars. And they call them bars because that's where the sand or the silt will run up and create like an actual bar across the mouth. So it's very choppy and it's very hazardous. And I couldn't believe how well known that problem is out there, because they all know why they can't keep up with the dredging of these bars. It happens so quickly because of the logging industry going right up to the streams. And there's nothing, now you have more erosion. And it's a multifaceted problem, because that fine dirt now goes into these gravelly streams, which is not a preferable substrate for the salmon that breed there. They want fast-flowing rivers with gravel because it's better to oxygenate the eggs. The silt comes in and smothers them, so you've got that issue. Plus then you have further downstream, you have the bars across the harbor entrances that they just can't keep up with it. And they're extremely treacherous. I mean, I was paddling from Newport, Oregon to Siuslaw in Florence, Oregon, the Siuslaw River. And 20 miles into this 30 some odd mile paddle, I get this phone call that our bar is closed, you're gonna have to turn around. Well, Oregon, you can time your watch at 10 o'clock in July, it starts blowing at 20 knots, religiously out of the north. And there's no way I was gonna be going against the swell that was building and that wind. And so I said, well, we'll just find a beach landing. No, we can't advise that, blah, blah, blah. They ended up picking me up, even though I said, really, I'm good. And I could see their boat coming. They sent a 47-foot cutter out, and they had to take my boat. Usually if the Coast Guard makes a rescue, your boat is history, because that's, they don't want to be sued, and you can understand that. But since it wasn't my call, I didn't call them, and they took that initiative, they had to take my boat, which I have to tell you was a really interesting ride going through that entrance, because they had to time it, and you could feel the wave just pushing through, pushing that boat through. And it was one of those situations where I see June on the water, on the land, because I had called, we were making arrangements to land, and I could see the boat, and it's like, and it's like you can't hide out there. So, and they were really wonderful. But they were the captain himself. Really, you could understand the mentality of why they did this, because they've lost guys going after people who do stupid things, and and get themselves in trouble, and then it's a life threatening event for them to go rescue these people. So you can totally understand that, but. There's a but too. The captain of the day, or actually I think he was the charge of the whole, because they're like little fiefdoms. He was in charge of that whole little station. I was asking him, I said, well, do you ever paddle? Do you ever kayak? He goes, no. You ever sail? No, I'm all motorboat. He goes, do you ever ride your bike? No. I mean, so he's not used to doing anything self-powered, so it's like incomprehensible to him and totally outside of his own personal comfort zone to be out there as I was, even though I'm fine with it, and it's funny how, other people can impose their fears, because I'll tell you, everybody has the worst inlet. Everybody has the worst inlet, hands down. And then it's like, that's not so bad. But you know what? To give everybody, their due, every inlet can be ugly. It's just, variations of ugly, and everything can go from flat to fluffy. But it is funny how everyone just has, oh, my inlet, this is the worst inlet. This is a notorious inlet. But the Columbia River mouth, let me tell you, on a good day, and it had been blowing. So after I broke the AMA on my head, I got repairs and waited the wind out, because it was still blowing so hard that it was just, the day I finally went, I ran into, and actually he almost ran into me, but he saw me, but I didn't know that. I was waving at a fisherman, 75-footer, boat just, comes up to me. It's kind of a little intimidating to have a boat that big coming right at you. And, and there's nowhere you can go. And then he blows his horn. So he's like, my son saw you. What are you doing out there? So I'm paddling across the mouth of the Columbia. Where are you going to go? I'm going to land at the beach on the other side. That's a surf beach. I'm like, I'll surf in. And he says, you don't have anyone out here with you? I said, no. He goes, well, you do now. So he escorted me to the North Jetty, which was really nice. And I said, I told him, I said, I'm so surprised I'm going so slow. The tide's supposed to be coming in, and I'm, supposed to be going in with it, and I'm still only going, a mile and a half. And usually I can travel 5 miles without really breaking a sweat in that boat. It's a very fast boat. It's a really good boat for deadlines and schedules and things. But I wasn't moving. He goes, well, you still have the current coming out of the river. I'm like, oh yeah, I guess that would make sense. But it was a tough current. And the swells were just, even though it had been windy, there was still it was like being on a giant waterbed. It was really unbelievable. It took a little bit to get used to that, just because it was the biggest swell I've ever been in my life, ever. I mean, it was like 2-story building swell. It was like just you're up and you're down and you're and surfing and was fun. But let me tell you, it was harrowing. It was a little harrowing.
Where was that again?
This was the Columbia River mouth. And unbeknownst to me, everyone's telling June how worried they are for me. So June is hearing this, and she's not saying anything to me because she doesn't want me to get all freaked out. I mean, I know, but also you never know until you actually do it. And the West Coast is cold. This is how I spent, even in California, I was wearing down. It was cold. It's absolutely nuts. And the other thing that we didn't really plan on with the West Coast is that until you're in San Francisco, and really actually until you're in Southern California, if you're doing this for a media campaign, the West Coast isn't really designed for it, because there's not a whole lot of mega centers, there's not a lot of urban areas until you get further south. But we made it work, a couple trips into Portland, but it is pretty desolate. That's pretty much it. And that's a guy who paddled with me in California, and he was really happy. Every now and then someone will want to paddle a whole leg with me. And usually if they're still talking to me at the end, this is what they do. Yes, and this was me after I crossed the Columbia River mouth. I mean, I was just very, very happy. So there's a lot of ground kissing on occasion, especially on the West Coast, because it was a big surf. You can't see it very well, but that's all fog. I mean, that was the other. There's just so many crazy little stories that go along with it. And this is like an outtake, but this was actually Bolinas, California. And I put this in there because it was so funny. You can see my hand right up there. And what happened was the wave got down, once the wave got down further, the boat just popped up and just totally just was ejected and went over backwards. And I mean, I was lucky I didn't break it, but this was like the wave of the day. We were just so happy. Hey, California, ha ha ha, done with Oregon, nothing can hurt you now. And then we just totally too relaxed and not paying attention. But it was really funny. It just flipped it over once. And so and I mean, I was holding on and I went flying. I mean, I was trying to duck dive it, and you really can't duck dive an outrigger canoe. I just had to try it once, and it didn't work so well. But, I was so sad to leave the West Coast because I thought, I never see anything like this on the East Coast. But I have to tell you, this year paddling, I've seen a leatherback by south of Long Beach Island, New Jersey. There's a seal that hangs out at Corson's Inlet, which is the south end of Ocean City, New Jersey. And then, of course, we have a ton of dolphins. And I have to say that New Jersey, if you're ever thinking of beachy places to go, New Jersey does have the friendliest dolphins. They are awesome. And they'll just swim along with you while you're paddling. And in Florida, they could care less about you. In California, they could really care less about you. But New Jersey has really friendly dolphins. So come down and visit us, because we have the best dolphins. And this was a funny story, just because I had to paddle in, and surf in without taking out anybody. This was September 12th in 2010, and this was Surfrider's big paddle out for clean water. And we thought it seemed like a great idea at the time to be part of it, and it really was. But let me tell you, that was like one of the most nerve-wracking parts of the whole trip, was to paddle in and try to avoid people in the water. But it worked. And I do have to plug my friend Jay's book. It actually is a bestseller. I think it's in its 7th printing now. And it is phenomenal. I mean, it's a really interesting, we know we have nature deficit disorder issues, but there's also something about the ocean. And it is kind of funny, because just trivia here, the salinity in your tears in your blood is exactly the same as the salinity in the ocean. I just think that's really interesting. So. And so that's like the end. Any questions?
How did you get started paddling? Like, when in your life? Since you were like 5 or?
No, actually I was scared of dark water when I was 5. And I really, I have to say, I think losing my father in 2004, like I always liked to paddle and paddled on a canoe in the lake. But I think losing my father in 2004, and then 2 weeks later, we had the 1,000-year storm in Medford Lakes, and we lost our dams. And I started going out in the ocean thinking, why haven't I been doing this? And it's something I just got into, and racing too. I like to compete in a 6-person outrigger canoe. That's a lot of fun, and the one person.
Margo, would you mind kind of repeating the question a little bit so we can get, because you're the only one that's mic'd, so we
Oh,
can
okay.
Thanks, sorry. Did you encounter any whales?
Yes. Yeah, I encountered whales, let's see, off of, I think, Northern California, saw them from afar, and then got a really good close-up crossing the Monterey Bay. There were a couple of people who escorted me. They were in a 2-person outrigger canoe. And these poor people, I mean, you never get started as early as you want to. And usually when they make this crossing, they start really early. And they're all kind of like, we do this earlier so we don't encounter this wind. And it was really windy. And then we saw the whale watching boats. We were like, let's go over there. And it was the humpbacks. And one of them, and they were just like doing all sorts of things. It was really amazing. One of them broke off from the pod and went right to the OC2. And I swear there has to be some footage somewhere of that, because we thought it was going to knock over the boat. And they're both clinging to the Akos to keep the ama down, and the whale just went right under. It was incredible. Yeah.
Now, what was your paddle on the Pacific?
My paddle on the Pacific, that was in 2010 from July 3rd to September 12th, and that was from Seattle to San Diego. Yeah, and that was basically in celebration of our national ocean policy, which, it's a good thing we have, but boy, it needs a lot of work.
When are you doing your trip from New Jersey to Detroit or Chicago?
That should start June 1st, this coming year.
Okay, if you want to make your, I was curious about your personal opinion about our national ocean policy, with a little more details of what you think about it. What should be changed?
Well, I wish our Mid-Atlantic region had NOAA as a lead instead of BOEM, which is the Bureau of Ocean and Energy Management.
Are they the drilling people?
Yeah. Funny you should ask. And we're in our region. Ocean policy is kind of like chunked out into regions, and there's some regions that are way more ahead of the game than ours, which is the Mid-Atlantic region, which is Virginia up to New York. And the New England region is really pretty good. They don't talk about fisheries, but they are coming up with a plan. And part of it is what is really actually kind of interesting is if you Google Marco portal, it's M-A-R-C-O portal, it's an awesome tool. And I wish that more people would use it that are planning to put wind farms up or LNG terminals, which I think shouldn't go up because it's all going to be export, but that's another discussion. But it seems absolutely insane to me that, we have information at our fingertips, basically, especially with this Margo portal that looks at all the many uses of the ocean, not just boat traffic, but where underground cables are out in the ocean, where fisheries are, where certain valuable fisheries are, This is all here. These groups that want to develop our ocean and coastal resources in certain ways are not even looking at what is out there right now with the data that we have, and they're just because it's clearly they're not looking at it, because you wouldn't put a highly explosive LNG terminal right where all these underground cables are, or where all this boat traffic is going to Port Newark, Port Elizabeth, New York City, et cetera. I mean, and it's like the most trafficked area of like the New York, New Jersey bight. And it's like, all right, Long Island, New Jersey, and it's like right here they want to put it. And you've got all this activity going in, and it just doesn't make sense. But anyway, that's like another thing. But they're doing some really good things out on the West Coast. And of course, another important part that's not really officially part of National Ocean Policy, but the marine protected areas is really a kind of a cool idea, because that's basically, and there's different levels apparently of that, what they allow, and what they won't allow. Like some places where you can't fish, some places where a certain amount of fishing is allowed. That's really an important way of conserving our natural resources too. I'm sorry, Carol.
You mentioned Project Kaisei. How do you spell that?
I think that's.
For plastics.
Yeah, I think that's Karsai. I think Karsai. It may be Karsai. What? K-I, is it? Okay. Kaisei. I don't know why I put an R in there. Yeah. Yeah, I should have that. That's another good little video clip to have too, since it's on YouTube. If it's on YouTube, it's like fair game. And that's a really, it's just kind of sobering to see that.
You talked before about the difficulty of sort of involving other people in the paddles.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm an organizer, and so I'm interested in your thinking about your message is we all need to get involved in this, but yet the paddle is sort of this solo woman doing her thing.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering sort of, is that what you think is the most effective thing to do? Is it what works for you to do, and trying to involve other people and bring it together would drive you completely crazy? And so just interested a little in your
So how best to organize, or what do I look for other people to do, or?
Well, you said earlier that,
Mm-hmm.
and I very much agree, that all of us need to play a role if
Yeah.
we're going to clean up oceans, if we're going to protect the earth. We're not going to destroy the foundation of our lives.
Yeah.
So that's about people working together,
Yeah.
coming together in large groups. But the vehicle that you're using is this kind of solo
Yeah.
effort.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering about your
Oh, so
about
what?
those two things.
Well-
at one level, it's kind of contradictory.
It is. I mean, because it's almost, the solo aspect kind of attracts, it kind of is like the media grab, like the stay-at-home mom who's basically, doing this, like leaving her family for 2 months, and who's, putting it out there to do what she can do to, get attention. So that's the grab. And then the groups that I managed to lure into this whole craziness, they get the attention. Like when we have the media come to the landing spots, then they take the ball and they grab it. Because the idea is to really, get the attention and then punt it over to whoever is working on those local issues. And it really is, I think it's beneficial, because there's a lot of people who care, but don't really know how they want to get involved. And to me, like the more groups, the merrier, because not every person is going to fit in with every group. So, it's like, here's the problem, here's the solutions, and get involved with these solutions, like in your backyard, that whole like think globally, act locally type thing. Although we almost have to really do both now, too. We really, really, really do. And export it too, because as for as many faults as we have in this country, at least we do something with our trash. There's a lot of places where I'm sure you've seen those pictures of like kids going out to fish or whatever, and they're wading through just like tons of garbage because, in undeveloped countries, they're getting some of the luxury items of disposable plastics before their infrastructure has a way to handle that. They have no trash pickup, and they're getting this stuff. I mean, like a lot of African countries have banned plastic bags because they are a breeding ground for malarial mosquitoes, or malarial, harboring mosquitoes. And, so there's all sorts of, it's funny. I mean, I really think that, sometime maybe if we lived in Margo's world, we'd be going to like Haiti and making like our prototype energy development there, getting people off like understanding that there's not much infrastructure. So, basically each person or each little area is going to have its latrines that are composting potties or whatever. I mean, there's ways that you can do that. I mean, like if you ever hike in the Appalachian Mountain Club and go up into the White Mountains where they have composting potties, I mean, above tree line. Now I know sometimes they have to dump them out and, they have helicopters come, but they're very self-contained, I mean, there's ways to do it that, and then bring it back here. Because what better way to me, for energy, to stabilize the grid than to have as many people who can and who are able to get off the grid. Because no matter what your energy source is, if you're getting it from the grid and the hurricane whacks it out, you have no power. It's not, what I mean? If everyone is sort of as self-sufficient as they can be, then I think it just increases our security that way. I mean, the whole grid thing too, when you think about it, 40% of our power is, of what we burn, it's like of our energy is lost in transmission. 40%, that's insane when you really think about it. I was thinking about that driving up. I don't know. And when I'm paddling, people say, don't you get bored? Do you listen to music? No, because it never stops. The seafood?
Yeah.
When we buy seafood? Well, I'm really spoiled and really lucky. We have a Whole Foods, and they're pretty good with, I don't know, I hope. I mean, I'm placing a lot of like trust in them, that they're actually selling me seafood that is coming from where they're saying it's coming from. But we've really cut down a lot on our seafood.
Do you trust like the ocean, like the Atlantic seafood?
That's a funny question, because actually I just don't want to eat too much of it. I mean, I don't, it's almost one of those things I don't even want to, I mean, and it's not a funny question because it's, it's a real solid question. I mean, I don't want to eat too much of it, I really just don't. Yeah, like that. And actually probably even less than that now. And I really have sworn off crab after doing Miami to Maine and seeing crab pots where I've seen crab pots. And then this past summer, like basically all downstream of a nuclear power plant on the Delaware. And like the Delaware, and I mean, even the nuclear power plant's not the worst of it. There's so much industry along the Delaware. And there was one stretch I was paddling, it's like I could actually taste whatever was in the air was in my mouth. It was just crazy. And it's like, we're eating this, I mean, one of the things I do think, I think as long as your kidneys and your liver are functioning really well, I think you can get away with a lot. And as long as you drink water a lot, you're flushing your system. I don't want to sound too dour, but, humanity has always had, pollutants to deal with even before we became industrialized. I mean, with volcanoes and stuff and burning, and I think we've kind of adapted to filter. I mean, we have adapted to filtering out a certain amount. It's just when do we tip, that scale, and unfortunately just, our levels of cancer, I think, especially childhood cancer, are a little depressing.
What do you think about overfishing and the legislation that's been put in place for that? Like, do you think, in your experience, that some fish should be eaten, like morally, because they're being overfished, or?
Yeah, there are some fish that are, and it's not just, I have to tell you, we really do need the protections of that. We do need that the marine fisheries provide. We do need those protections. We are, and we're seeing that they're working, you know, like winter flounder is sort of coming, or is it summer flounder that's coming back? Winter flounder is a little tenuous. I mean, there's always the flounder battles, but these regulations are working. They really are. I mean, you're going to have people who cheat, you know. I mean, like in the Gulf, you know, I was asking one, you know, bunch of folks, did you catch anything? Yeah, we caught a bunch of smalls, but we ate them. You know, or the guy, you know, the head boat captain in Maryland, well, we caught our limit in Maryland, but these are Virginia bluefish, or these are, you know, so they went over state lines. And like, so you've got, you know, but they do help. But then you've got like the International Commission on Atlantic Tuna, whatever that is, and that's a whole nother battle. I mean, that's, you know, because that's global and people don't want to stop. I mean, it's like, you know, it's like every last fish in the sea. If they don't catch it, someone else is going to catch it. And bluefin tuna are really they're really collapsing. I mean, they're catching, I think they're catching like 10% of what they used to catch like 20 years ago. It's bad, you know, and then there's a lot of fish that are ending up in freezers in Japan. Yeah, and dolphins. Oh, that's another. Did you see The Cove? That movie? Yeah. Yeah. That's a real sobering movie, you know, real sad. But good, but well done. I haven't seen it, but I know I should see it, but I just can't bear to. But I know it's really well done. And, you know, the Colorado Ocean Coalition, if you ever get out to Boulder, has a really awesome shindig. And it was a little, I mean, I tried to stay off the subject because Louis Sahoyas was sitting right across from me, and he's the guy who'd made The Cove. So I couldn't tell him, I didn't see your movie.
Do you get chances to pamper yourself on these trips at all? Like every 10 days, you like stay in bed and breakfast or something? Or?
You know, when we crossed the Columbia River, when I did that, we went to this Astoria Inn, which was nice, and it was. But you know, for the most part, it's like you're just like boom, 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 boom. You know, it actually, I'm able to have more energy, I think, because I get a break from everything. Than, you know, even though I'm out paddling, than the poor, you know, person on land doing the logistics who's trying to like make sure that the landing spot's fine and arrange all, you know, the meetings with the other groups and the press and stuff like that. I mean, like, literally they're in tears at the point where like they're happy when there's like a bad weather day and they get to take a break. You know? I mean, because it can be a grueling thing, you know. Like, I mean, it's so funny because I paddled a little bit with Deb, and I met up with like who's going to Guatemala, and they just were like, oh, this paddling to a schedule. And I'm like, but you're doing it in the wrong boat, you know. Deb, like my boat, it's like fully loaded. It's not even 40 pounds. I don't even think with gear it's 40 pounds, or it might be. Her boat, she's paddling to Guatemala, and this, like, out of the gate with nothing in it, the boat's like 75, 80 pounds. Like, how are you paddling to, and not to knock older women, but she's a grandma, she's in her 60s, and she's doing this. And I'm like, how are you doing this with this boat? And at least, you know, David and Amy have each other, but they're still in like a canoe, you know?
I've never been on the water for anything expensive, but I have paddled a canoe in a local lake. And it's work. How do you do these things all day long?
Well, well, it's kind of cheating. If you actually were in that canoe, I mean, I'm serious, it's so lightweight, you'd be like, you're cheating. I mean, you know, it's easy to do 40 miles at a clip in that kind of a canoe because it's so lightweight. It's so, like I said, I don't even have to paddle really hard. If I have a flat day, I can go 5 miles an hour, you know, and not really break a sweat.
So it's the shape of
Yeah.
the canoe is part of it?
The shape and and it's very narrow, you know, it's like 14 inches at the beam. So it's not a regular heavy canoe.
Well, I think if you go New York City to Chicago, you'll be going against the current.
I will, especially on the Erie Canal. And I mean, and actually the Hudson is tidal up until Albany. But of course, if I'm doing long stretches, I'll have it with me. And then they won't. So, yeah, it's definitely something to train for.
You've got 6 hours each way.
Yes. And then there's always eddies and things.
Still curious about the Stranding Center.
Oh, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, they actually, and they unfortunately lost their NOAA funding, I think. I think they're still battling to try to get more funding, but they are our state's like sole, place to go if you have a stranded seal. And that guy, Bill Schultz, the picture I showed of you, he's awesome. He's not only a riverkeeper, but he also has gone out and dragged dead seals off of the beach, and and he really is. He's an awesome guy. But the Marine Mammal Training Center is a small little group, and they whatever comes ashore, they'll even do turtles too. They actually have a permit for turtles, and we do have quite a lot of seals, believe it or not, in New Jersey. Yeah, and they like to hang out around Sandy Hook, especially. So, and dolphins. I mean, and we do have the occasional, actually, not this past summer, but the summer before, we had record numbers of dolphins washing up. They had that morbillia virus, and it's related to measles. Yeah, it kind of makes you wonder, just because there had been a measles outbreak in New York City, and then with Hurricane Sandy and all the raw sewage, you just kind of wonder, if there's some kind of connection with that. I have no idea. I haven't really heard too much about that. But we lost, I think it was close to 200 or around the 200 mark of dolphins, yeah.
You talk about seeing all of these different wonderful creatures. You ever see sharks?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's a really funny story. I'll keep it really short. I was staying overnight in Rhode Island, and was one of those places, paddled into Rhode Island to Newport, Rhode Island on 4th of July. There's no place to stay. So this awesome guy, Bill Casey of Casey's Marina, he's the only one who caters to the 100-footer plus. And he said, somehow, I paddled by his dock. He said, you could stay here, you could tie up your boat next to my boat. And he used to do Ironman triathlons. And he had this big stretch, bus thing. So Emily and I stayed there. And the next day we couldn't go out because the fog was just too intense. And it was I knew it, because I paddled in on a beautiful sunny day. And it's if there's a sunny day in Newport, Rhode Island, just keep going. Because it's going to be foggy the next day. And it was foggy. And then the next day, it's and I had the schedule. By then I was out of days off, and I really had to keep my schedule. And two little old guys come up, old salty guys, and they're knocking on the door, and they're we wouldn't go out today, wouldn't go out today. I'm I have a schedule. Same conditions as yesterday, don't go out today. I'm ah. And Bill was down at the docks. He says, well, my buddy's out there, and he's on his 50-foot boat, and he can't even see the bow of his boat. So we waited till noon, except it was, a big swell day, and it was a 42-mile paddle. To wait till noon, I hated doing that, but there was no choice. And it was a big swell today. NOAA called for, and this is I hadn't paddled on the East Coast, on the West Coast yet. So 7 to 11 was fairly sizable, and they measure halfway up the wave. So it's double that, when you're in the trough looking up. So it was a 7-11 day with breaking waves. And, kind of disturbing to be out in a little bit. But, but it was all right. I got used to it. It was good. Then it became fun. And then I saw these things in the water that looked like sticks. I saw a stick, and I thought, and I would pick trash up, as I'm paddling, and I tried to and I thought, what is that stick attached to? I don't know if it's attached to anything, but I'll just try to, pick it up and see if I can get it in the canoe. And I see another small stick behind it like this. And I'm still not thinking, because it's a stick. It was a straight stick. And I don't know what possessed me to turn my head to the right, and I see Jaws. And it spins, and it looks just it spins. And when it does, and I mean, it spun, it was Jaws, and it goes blink. And then I realized it looks just that's not a stick. And so, so then I'm oh, and at first it was really just oh, sharks, or big sharks. And then it's you get past it, it's that is so cool. That is so cool. I just saw 2 sharks, and I'm pretty sure they were hammerheads, because they just the shape of the giant dorsal fin, and then it wasn't a thresher. It didn't have that long, but it was and so when I saw the great white off of Malibu, it was I thought, wow, I should turn around and take it. And I thought, no, don't take chances. Don't take a picture. Just keep going.
Do you have your schedule mapped out some, so you have a sense of when you're going to be coming through here?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. And actually, I feel bad because I neglected to put that up here. So I was going to have a map of that, but yeah, I do have it all mapped out. So it'll take about 2 months. So with a,
Miner's helmet with a camera mounted on it?
yeah, I have it on my canoe, but I have to find a better location. I was talking to the film guys. I got to figure out to rig something up on the Yakos because like there's too much of the bow of the canoe, or I should get something that's higher.
Do a GoPro on your head.
Or a GoPro on my head. Yeah. Yeah, see, the stick would be perfect because like I would think the head would be too much movement, you know, maybe, I don't know. But yeah, so.
Wow. Well, Margo, thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
And just a reminder, folks, if you want to keep up with her adventures, she's got a sign-in book there.
I promise I won't blitz you with emails.
Yes,
I'm not,
absolutely.
I don't want to add to anyone's email
And,
clutter.
we welcome your feedback on the feedback forms at the table in the back. So thank you for coming out tonight.